Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
All right, so we're ready. I will call the meeting to order at 6:05 PM, and there has been declaration of public notice.
Yes.
All right. Then we will move right into possible action items, updated 20 reopening plan. Dan, do you want to start? Or,
Sure, glad to, thank you.
all right.
Okay, so board has received a copy of our written memo with our updated reopening plan. And so I did prepare some slides to just go through an overview of the recommendation and the plan and background information. And then we also have our entire admin team here tonight as well that can answer any very specific questions that you might have with regard to the reopening. So as usual, if you wouldn't mind, if I could get through the slides first, if you could hold your questions to the end, and then we'll make sure there's plenty of opportunity to go into any of those questions.
Thanks.
So I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So 5 parts that we'd like to go through this evening. A little bit of just, again, reviewing our background and the timelines. Just a reminder where we're at currently with our elementary and secondary hybrid models. Reviewing our updated safety and risk mitigation protocols. And then get into the phase 4 of our plan and then next steps following that. Okay, I won't read through these. You're well aware of what happened. This is just a reminder of where we began back to last summer. As you know, we started with orders under from Public Health Madison-Dane County that we began the school year under. And then we were making adjustments along the way as the orders went to the courts and so on. But more importantly, on the second slide these are the dates that the board made decisions about our reopening. Okay, so back in October is when the board approved the first phase. Remember, the first group we brought in, of course, with our 4K2 students. Then in December, we approved the next phase for grades 3 through 5. And then in January, approved the secondary for grades 6 through 12. And then the reason for our special meeting this evening is because this week on March 2nd, we received an updated order from Public Health Madison-Dane County, emergency order number 14. Okay, so 4K5, as I just mentioned, just as a reminder, those were our first 2 phases of having students return in our hybrid model. Our first group returned on January 25th, second group on February 8th. Okay, and just as a reminder, this is a slide you've seen before. This is what our current classrooms look like in the elementary school, where we have the groups in cohorts with physical distancing in all the classrooms. And the one on the right is actually where the students are actually eating their lunch. So this is the distancing that we have in place right now in the elementary classrooms. Our current enrollment, again, this is a choice for parents. And so we have approximately 42% of our elementary students that are attending under the hybrid model, and about 58% are with virtual 2.0. And this is all schools combined for our elementary. So just again, as a reminder of the number of sections, based upon those numbers, you'll see the number that are needed for hybrid versus virtual at each of those various grade levels. And then grades 6 through 12. Okay, just again, this is a slide you've seen before, just a reminder of the timeline that we're in that planning stage, and we are ready to bring students into the buildings on March 15th under a very similar hybrid model with 2 days per week. These are numbers that were not shared till recently. So our numbers at the middle school are hybrid. About 54% of our students are choosing to return under the hybrid model, with 46% remaining with the virtual. And very similar at the high school. About 55% of our students chose the hybrid versus 45% for virtual. Okay, so now what has changed that brings us here this evening? All right, so emergency order number 14. There are 4 key components that are part of the order that remain requirements for K-12 schools in Dane County. Okay, the first one is nothing new, that we must still ensure that all of our employees are provided with and have face coverings at all times. Second one is nothing new, ensuring that employees maintain at least 6 feet physical distancing from others to the greatest extent possible at all times. And we spent a lot of time talking about how public health has defined greatest extent possible. Meaning it has to be intentional, that we remain, with the physical distancing. 3 and 4 are the new parts of the order. Okay, so item 3 for students. When 6 feet distancing is not possible for students, ensuring that student and employee groupings are as static as possible by having the same groups of students stay with the same employees as much as possible. Restrict mixing between groups as much as possible. And that's the new terminology that is having an impact on what we can do. The as much as possible is being defined in a very less restrictive way than the greatest extent possible. And so, of course, we know best practice. We still want to try to do that as much as we can, but the order now does give us the flexibility to not be as rigid with the 6 foot distancing. And then the last part is it's a new wording in the order, but it's very consistent with what we've had in place in the past. The common areas such as cafeterias, auditoriums, and gymnasiums can be used as classrooms to provide food as childcare and youth settings and for government functions. Student groupings should be in district spaces within common areas, and student groupings may not mix with other student groupings. So a little bit different terminology consistent with what we have had in place. Okay, the next one, I won't read through these recommendations. These have not changed. Okay, so the recommendations that were in place since last December are still in place for guidance to follow with schools to reopen. Again, reopening in a phased approach, mitigation strategies, contact tracing, having plans to be available for virtual, and then, of course, being able to have testing if it becomes available for us. Okay, so you've heard a lot about, what public health guidance and restrictions and recommendations and requirements versus CDC, of course, at the federal level. And so I just wanted to share just some of the summary of the guidance from CDC, and that is very much aligned, and that's where public health makes their recommendations and guidance from. So there are 3 key elements, again, very consistent. Number 1, mitigation, of course. Secondly, looking at community transmission as a factor, and then third, the mitigation and different learning modes to be able to adjust to that. So these 5 items you've seen over and over and over. We all can memorize these or have these memorized, that we know the most important things that we can do to mitigate transmission. Masking, physical distancing, hand washing, cleaning, and contact tracing. Again, this is all coming again from the CDC. All right, and then the last thing that I'd like to share is with regard to the mitigation strategies specifically. Again, the mask for the first part, of course, again, is universal and really important. And then secondly, that language that you've seen from public health is the same language used by CDC. Physical distancing, at least 6 feet, should be maximized to the greatest extent possible. And to ensure physical distancing, schools should establish policies and implement, and so on. The difference is, of course, from the CDC, is a recommendation, not a requirement. And in the past, MDC took that a step further and put it into their order as a requirement. So no longer is that a requirement, it's still best practice, but we have some flexibility. Okay, and then the part with regard to transmission, this is a change from CDC. So at the end of February, what they've identified as high transmission rates, they are now looking at number of new cases per 100,000 over the past 7 days. So Dane County does track this data. That's not something that they had necessarily included in their dashboard as part of their metrics in the past. But that is one of the considerations when we're talking about community spread and transmission. And so you see the high transmission rate is when we have over 100 new cases per 100,000. Also with regard to the positivity rates. So where are we at in Dane County? We're basically right at that 100 case mark. Okay, so you'll see we peaked at the end of November, December, where we were approaching 500 cases. For the last month, we've been now near, and we actually have dipped below at times that 100 per case. So we've been really back and forth this last month between the substantial transmission and the high transmission in Dane County. Certainly much better than where we were at a couple months ago. Okay, so that's the background information. And the most important takeaway is that the protocols and the recommendations haven't changed, but as far as the order, we now have some flexibility. And we know all along the balance has been between trying to meet the educational goals of children while still trying to keep staff, children, and community safe. And that's been the challenge all along that has been so difficult, to navigate through. And again, this is just our flow chart we've been using. Nothing has changed, again, with the phases of the phased opening to the goal of eventually a full return of all students, teachers, and staff. All right, so our next phase in the plan, we reviewed the first three phases. The next goal will be to get our elementary from 2 days a week to 4 days a week. And in order to do this, we currently, remember, have our students cohorted into 2 groups. So a classroom teacher teaching the hybrid model has one group of students on the first day, cohort A. A second group comes in on the next day, cohort B. Together, on average, that teacher has between 17 and 23 students altogether. And so ideally what we would be able to do is simply student can see all their teacher can see all their students at once, combine the cohorts together. It's not that simple in that we would have to make some adjustments because some of the classes are a little bit larger. For example, if you have a total of 17 between the A and B cohort, that is a lot easier just to combine together. If you have a teacher that is closer to that 22, 23 total, now we still have a lot of kids in the classroom. And the principals will speak to that about how we're going to deal with that moving on. But that's, as far as the scheduling goes, there's no change in the master schedule. It's just, we already have the students divided, and it's just now having those 4 days a week. The third bullet point, if a student is in cohort C, the virtual, and chooses to remain, the schedule does not change. And we will have to, we'll want to survey families again to provide this new option. That might change the decision for families about which model that they choose. And so that would be part of the plan moving forward, is to get that parent voice before we would implement this next phase. And then the fourth bullet point is important for you to understand that depending on how many families chose a particular option, that it, again, could change some of our teacher assignments to accommodate accordingly. And then lastly, to confirm that we would still continue with our Wednesdays as our dedicated to our co-planning days for our staff. So that's, again, at a very high level of the overview of what this would look like. Again, the principals will be glad to go into specifics on each of these bullet points. So our recommendation is that we do move forward to our next phase 4, and we believe that we can be ready to implement on April 5th. That is immediately following spring break, so Monday. And with that phase, that we would continue family choice, that they could choose again to have the virtual option or the 4-day in-person instruction option. And so this is a tentative timeline of what that would look like and why we chose April 5th. So if the board were to accept that recommendation this evening, we would immediately tomorrow on the 5th send out a communication to families and a new family survey. We would want that survey returned by Monday the 8th. We believe that we don't need an extended period of time like we've had before. This is really straightforward choice. I think most families have, know what they might do. We would include, of course, plenty of information about the details of this plan, but we really think that we want to get those surveys in so we can move forward with the planning. And then the next, the 9th through the 23rd, the one change in this planning from our previous phases is that we have the work to do, of course, for the principals and staff to be able to update the schedules and so on. But in the past, when we had students on different days of the week, we had to get the kids scheduled before we could move ahead and make bus schedules. Now, since all the students will be on the same days, we can do that concurrently and schedule buses at the same time our school staff is scheduling the sections. So that moves up the timeline a lot quicker. It saves us basically 2 weeks in this transition to the next phase. And so we could have this ready to go to inform our families on March 24th before spring break, and then immediately following spring break, be ready to move to the next phase again on that April 5th. So again, if the board were to approve the plan as presented, next step would be informing families and surveying along with that timeline. Okay, so I know that, again, was a really high overview and fairly quickly. So, but with that, before I turn it over to questions, I'm going to give our principals an opportunity to just offer any thoughts, if there's anything that you would like to expand upon or correct that I may have said, to clarify, but then we'll go to questions. Okay, so with that, Susan, I guess we'll turn it back to you to facilitate questions and answers.
Lorraine, sorry.
No worries. So principals, do you feel that teachers are prepared and ready to start in April?
Anybody want to take that?
Well, I'll start with the fifth graders at GDS. I mean, they were given a heads up on this. We have only 7 teachers that this affects at GDS, and 4 of them are already in-person teaching. So they're obviously ready to go. I think the other 3 are wrapping their minds around it. And I think they're glad that it will be, you know, the thoughts of April 5th start date versus anything in March, I think is appealing to them. So they do have some time to get ready. So I do think that, we'll be fine at GDS with the 5th grade, but we're the smallest contingency here.
Well, and I am assuming, I mean, there will be, we'll know after the survey, but I'm guessing at least a section per grade level that'll remain virtual. I don't know how they'll, but yeah, we'll have to figure that out, I guess. But
If
any
I
other
can hear from
thoughts?
the other principals as well.
I can go. I think the teachers that are there probably feel more comfortable. The last survey that we just took did indicate we would have had more classes coming back. So those teachers that were recently notified probably, like Chris said, will need a little more kind of wrapping their head around all the policies and procedures. But, you know, they're aware that, you know, they are coming back. It's just, you know, time to get classrooms set up and schedules is kind of where they'll need to kind of work at next.
I would agree. I think Reed is talking, but we can't hear him. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna go. I would agree with Connie that some of the staff that are already in the building have a little bit, probably greater comfort having adjusted to some of those the routines and procedures that we have in place. It will be an adjustment. Right now in some of our classes we have 8 or 9 kids, and as we add kids in the classroom it becomes a little bit more crowded and there's just a little less space. And so I think that there's some anxiety and apprehension around just more kids in a classroom and a little less space for, because of that. I think that a lot of staff are finding places to go and get the vaccine. And so the more and more staff that can get the vaccine, I think that will also help the comfort levels a lot.
Thank you, Angie.
And can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, thanks.
All right, good. I did that on purpose to go last, actually, because I'll just echo what everybody else. No, just kidding. I would say that there's some folks that are more prepared than others, but that's just about how it's gone throughout this whole process. And so it's about making sure that we keep the safety measures in place. We make sure that as we go into this next phase, there's some planning that we still need to do about some of the spacing, but today spent some time going around the school and making sure that we had enough desks and tables and space, and how many rotations we can do for lunch, depending on numbers, because it's really hard to predict. Because of the last survey, we were a little surprised that just the varying levels of grade level of how many folks were wanting to make that switch at that time. So it's just gonna, again, we gotta wait and see the survey, but a month to get ready and not like spring this on folks, today and say that we're gonna do it in a week or two, about a month away yet. I think that's gonna be helpful to get us, get the staff all ready to go and support them.
Thanks, Reed.
Susan?
Dan or principals, do we have any updates on the vaccines for the teaching staff? It's my impression that effectively, unless they've been able to get it somewhere else, that their scheduling starts on March 15th. Is that correct?
We just got an update today. We'll be sending a message out to staff by tomorrow with updated information. And the good news is that Public Health has received the entire supply that they requested. And so they'll be able to start a week earlier. And so we're thrilled with that.
That's fabulous. What date will they actually start? 7th?
March 9th.
Tuesday, I think it is.
March 9th.
March 9th, that Nicole just put in the chat box, and I think Krista said too.
Yeah, that's great.
So
That's great news.
All right, then Elizabeth and Eric, and then Peter.
I have a few questions. So one, looking at the timeline, I didn't see anything in there around sort of teacher planning and prep. And I know that the last time that we did reopening, we gave space for that. So can you talk a little bit about what the teacher sort of classroom prep, protocol prep is going to look like, and what kind of time we're allocating to that, and whether or not that takes away from instructional time, or that'll be something that is embedded within kind of our normal schedule? And I have like 10 other questions, but I'll just do one at a time today.
I can speak to that briefly. We're going to do our best to try to embed that in the course of our regular work days. And if there's some additional time, look at other ways to compensate for any like classroom setup, but really trying to be as careful as possible with not interrupting the instructional days that we have remaining. So it is balancing a lot of things, but we are going to try not to have additional, like full transition days off of school.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. The other question I have kind of around classroom organization is around PPE. And so I know that staff have the ability to request PPE, or they did, there was a form or something that they filled out, but knowing that, if we're not going to be using, 6 feet strictly, there may be requirements or requests for plexiglass and those kinds of things. Are we, I'm frozen? Oh, I don't know what to do. Am I unfrozen?
No, you're fine.
Oh, okay. Susan told, or Joyce told me I was frozen. Anyway, so are we prepared in the event that we have an influx of requests? Do we have enough supplies, or do you think we'll have enough supplies by the time we reopen in April?
I think short answer is yes. Jared, Krista, your teams have been involved with, facilitating that, but I don't know if you'd like to expand upon that.
Yeah, Jared can add in too, but to this point, we haven't really had shortages of things or we've been able to replenish, kind of based on the supplies that the secondary schools have been requesting. I know some things have been more challenging to get at different times, but I think, and like I said, Jared or Sean can confirm, we're prepared to meet the needs of the 612, and we have an idea probably of what to expect once we know how many more teachers are coming back for the elementary too. So I think keeping a pretty close eye on all of that.
Great. Well, Krista, while I have you, My next question is about nursing services. And I know that they've been working really hard on contact tracing. And now that we are likely going to get an influx of students, I would imagine we'll have more students participating because it's 4 full days. How do you feel kind of from a nursing services staff capacity perspective to manage contact tracing?
Yeah, they have been managing it. So that's good. We've added some staff members, which has been great. And the new members at least we've got our new members of the team on board, and we've got a little bit of flexibility there. So I'm feeling tentatively like okay about it based on just the numbers that we've been looking at and seeing. Yeah, I think it's definitely something to pay attention to. As we've said all along, if we need to have additional support with contact tracing, we've got to have some plans, and we've got a little capacity within our team. So I think we are tentatively feeling pretty good about that, especially having had, a little bit of time here and experience and an idea about how much time a single contact trace situation takes. So yeah, it is a concern. It's definitely one of the strongest factor, the protective factors is a solid contact tracing plan. And we were in the midst of having that discussion for 612 and just making sure we have, equally solid plans and as we have for 4K5.
Great. Thank you for that. The other question I have is just want to confirm that our quarantine protocols will be the same. So in the event that there is a positive case in a classroom in a cohort, that cohort will be quarantined and then it'll get virtual learning as it has been designed?
I think the short answer is it will be the same. We have a number of scenarios, and so they will be really similar. That cohorting piece is really important. So yeah, that's work that we're doing, and Sean's taking a lead on to like updating those scenarios. It will be the same for 4K5, the same processes that we're using. So it's just a matter of keeping tight where we can, and it just may be the fact that more students in the spaces, we wouldn't potentially be able to say, that 6 feet, the 6 feet is physical distancing, I think bears saying that like that has not changed, right? So for contact tracing, if you aren't able to have that in your setting, then, what that eliminates is the option to say half the class was not in, 6 feet contact, or just readily say that. But
yeah.
So it does, the challenge of contact, it does add a layer of challenge to the contact tracing process. Not impossible, we're ready for it, but yes, it gets.
Yeah, I mean, it's another complexity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And any complexity adds a layer. All right, last question, and I think this is a question probably on a lot of people's minds, so I will give it to you, Dan. What about 612?
Well, at this point, 612 is scheduled to return in 2 weeks on March 15th. And so once we get those students, returned and in place, then we'll evaluate the 612 at that point.
Eric?
Dan, can you, I didn't see it, when we were talking about moving to phase 4, it's full days, right? 4 days a week, is that correct? Do you have a time, like the time period of when the start and the end would be for the day?
Yeah, it's the same as it currently is, 8:30 to 2:30. 8:30
to 2:30. Okay, so it'll be 8:30 to 2:30, 4 days a week, with Wednesdays being the days that is the teacher work day, the hybrid day, or the online day.
Yeah.
And that's where we're going to clean and do all that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. And then backing up kind of just what Elizabeth asked about the 6 to 12, when that plan starts on the 15th, that is, it's a hybrid 2 days a week. What is the start time and end time for those days? Like for when middle school and high school go back? Because they're getting out at like 1:30?
12:35 is when they get out.
12:35, okay.
So we're running, it'll be 4 50-minute periods.
Okay, 2 days.
In the morning. So that's 4 days a week. If students opted to come back for that hybrid model, they are in school in person 2 days out of the 4 days a week.
Gotcha.
Either Monday, Tuesday, or Thursday, Friday. And then in the afternoon, we are running our virtual plus periods where students and teachers will be meeting as well. So those are those designated half-hour periods in the afternoon.
And then, so I realized we were talking about phase 4, Dan, which is the elementary schools. I'm wondering if we could potentially develop, or if you may already have a phase 5, which would include full day hybrid for 6-12, and then 4-day a week for 6-12. Is that something possible that we could maybe get on the table looking forward?
To answer it specifically, is it possible? Of course. At this point, our focus has been on preparing for that March 15th, so we have not moved past as far as specific planning beyond that. But as I mentioned, when students return, that would be the next evaluation about how that is going and how we might adapt in the future.
Yeah, because I would like to see us get to those 2 hybrid days being more full days, and then eventually talking about when we might be able to move for middle school and high school to the 4 days a week too, to maybe have those plans prepared and ready. Because if these vaccinations are going to happen when you say they will, and I certainly hope that they do, then that, we're looking at possibly maybe being able to open up the 6-12 more than we already have. So I just would ask to maybe consider that in the future, in the near future.
Peter?
First question would be, what are you doing? All the recommendations say to maintain small groups and cohorts with consistent cohorts with the same employees consistently with the kids. How are we arranging to do that in phase 4? It doesn't look like it's changed too much. Is it just other than putting A and B together? But what are we doing to maintain those small groups?
Well, Peter, in general, the homeroom teachers are able to keep their students pretty static. I think that's the language in the order.
Okay.
So even when there is experiences with related arts, some of those options might still happen in a virtual way. Even, going out with their classmates that they're with in their homerooms for lunch and recess. So elementary is very different in that regard than secondary.
Sure.
So it really is, I don't want to say any of this is easy, but it's much more feasible to keep elementary students with their smaller group of classmates for the day.
What about at the beginning of the end of the day, coming and going? Is there anything done there to maintain that?
Well, teachers still have, the principals have designed entrances and exits for different grade levels, et cetera. And, staggering, how people are moving in the halls and the like. But, let's be honest, that it is difficult to
I know.
right? So that there is some inherent, little kids don't always know what 6 feet looks like. And so there is going to be some groups together, but you hope that it's with masks on and they're not congregating for 15 minutes, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that the kids are going to have trouble with 6 feet, which is why maintaining them in a cohesive group throughout the day is kind of the important thing to do. The second thing I worry about is educational disruptions as we change models. And it doesn't look, just by combining the A-B, that it looks to me like this would be a fairly straightforward change without disruption to what's going on educationally. Is that correct? Or can you tell me about some of the disruption that this change causes?
I'll go. For the most part, if the kids stay together and with their teacher, the A and B group comes together, those kids would pretty much be kind of business as usual. The group that would be new to school potentially would be leaving a virtual teacher and then joining a new teacher at school. So some children could possibly have their third teacher.
That should be a relatively small number of students, right?
Well, it depends. It could be a class. It could be 2 classes. it's hard to know. I mean, some are coming from, groups of 4 or 5 classrooms that are still virtual. So coming to 1 or 2,
Yeah,
could
I guess my comment is I want to make sure that we focus on doing whatever we're doing as best we can. And I know it's hard for teachers to adapt and adopt, and that we focus on delivering good instruction and we be careful that when we change it, we do it mindfully so that we don't create disruption and make it difficult for teachers to deliver quality instruction because they're trying to keep up with the changes.
I think Rita was trying to talk again.
Oh, Reed?
I'll try that, because last time when I spoke, it was bad. Is this okay?
It seems it's better right at the
Better.
moment. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it's
we
good.
try to get- It's good. I think, Peter, your comment about it's hard for teachers to adapt is a little, these teachers have adapted like you wouldn't believe. I mean,
Oh, I'm
that's
sure.
been the strength of our teachers. I mean, they are knocking that out of the ballpark for sure. And yeah, of course, we're going to minimize the amount of disruption for students and families and teachers as best we can. The issue is we can't be perfect on that, and to be upfront about that, we have to be, because otherwise it's being dishonest to our community and to all of you. So there's some folks that might have a third teacher. And we talked a lot about this at our admin teacher, our meeting today. Luckily, all of our teachers care about kids. And if this, young folks get another adult that cares about them, I think that's a plus. And I have a student at Taylor Prairie that may have a third teacher, and I've got to prescribe to that too. It doesn't matter what first grade teacher young Betsy gets, they all care about her, and that's the important part. And that's hard a little bit, but it's also knowing that we're going to try to minimize that for sure.
Thank you.
Lorraine?
This question is for Dan or Jarrett. With the change in schedule, would that impact transportation at all?
Yeah, so it will impact because we will have more kids that will have to fit on the buses because they won't be split between 2 days. So we won't be able to provide that every other seat. It will, one student or a family unit will be assigned to one seat. So there won't be, additional 6 feet between each group of kids on a bus. In addition to that, we will have to redo all of our routes for K through 5. With that, it's because of the situation of different days and different routes already.
And then what's the impact on meal delivery for the students who remain at home? Is that still happening on Wednesdays? Or?
Yes, so we're going to maintain the Wednesday delivery, and that's another reason that we want to keep Wednesday as a day that there's no in-person learning. But it will look a little differently for those kids that are hybrid. Due to the fact that they'll be attending 4 days, they still will be eligible for a meal on Wednesday. And what most likely will happen is that meal for Wednesday, that breakfast and lunch will be sent home with them. So bigger picture, we'll probably have less deliveries. However, we still will be delivering and having sign up for Wednesday delivery.
Another transportation question that I had is just with regard to the middle school and high school, if there are kids who need to get back to school in the afternoon for extracurriculars, given that they're coming home so early, is there any way we can assist with that transportation? Has any thought been given to that, or are they totally on their own, or what do we do? What's the thought on that?
We're in the process of trying to develop a plan to provide that practice bus concept that we have. We're working with Jeff Schreiner in the athletic department to identify where all the practices are, the times of those practices, so we can coordinate. We still have the same requirements that we have for regular transportation. So for example, if we're transporting kids from Cottage Grove to the high school or different practice sites, because obviously we have to use more practice sites with the fall and spring sports really happening in a very condensed period. We still have to have kids sign up for that, and we have to clean the buses if there's going to be different cohorts. So those are the hurdles that we're trying to figure out before we can release information.
And then I guess same question for the middle school, because I assume there'll be some similar athletics going on. So it's kind of a late bus instead of just bringing kids home that might potentially be picking some kids up. Or
Right.
Go ahead, Chris.
No, you can go.
We're just continuing to explore that. There's a little differences in schedules, like the high school's released at 12:30
Okay.
and
Right.
middle school's at
Right.
1:45.
I know
so-
it's complicated.
Yeah, I'll just add real quickly, one of the things to keep in mind too, though, in the spring sports, most of those are not happening at the school. They're all outdoor activities, plus with the stadium renovation. So there's not going to be much happening at the high school. They're all over the place in the different, village and municipal fields. So.
True. Right. Any other questions? I had a couple. I guess, well, one, this isn't so much about the plan as just a follow-up, given that it's the middle school and high school may stay similar schedules unless things change and we can do something different. I think a point to mention about that, or to emphasize though, when we look at 6 through 12, is that even though the PHMDC didn't distinguish between grade levels when they said that, try to keep them, that the staff needs to be 6 feet from the students try to keep them that far apart. It was relaxed, but there still is that piece about the cohorts that we've been talking about. And that is still, in my mind, pretty close to impossible to keep the same cohorts in middle and high school, just because of the way those classes function. Because we've had some parents already asking about that, saying, hey, they took all the restrictions off, and that still is a different situation entirely when you look at secondary school. And I just think it's important for people to keep that in mind. So yes, while I agree with Eric, I'd like us to keep thinking about, even if it's for a short time, can we bring more kids back at some point? I think we have to be realistic about how that might or might not work. My other question though is not immediately related, but thinking again about summer school, listening to the governor or reading about his comments, and he talked about encouraging a robust summer school program. And I know that, that's obviously totally optional for our teachers to, who want to sign up to teach those programs. But given that, and usually most of our programs are enrichment type orientation. I guess I'm wondering if there's more thinking being done about people, they can be enriching and still have academic standards tied to them over the summer, and whether there's any thought to going outside our district to look for summer school teachers. I know we have some every now and then who volunteer, but for various specialty type classes, but kind of a more aggressive search for people if there's a need to beef up the summer school program, especially if there are credit deficiencies or anything like that. Is that part of the conversation, or should it be, if it isn't?
We definitely do hire outside of the district when that is a need. And in the past, we haven't had an issue finding staff when we use our internal staff and then a few outside of the district hires. We make it work. Again, it's really hard to predict what this year will look like, even with outside of the district staff, because so many teachers, they've just been
a draining year.
Yep.
Yeah.
But we will do our best. And then in terms of the enrichment, I want to emphasize that even through some of the enrichment classes, although they're called enrichment, kids are still reading and writing and problem solving and comparing and contrasting and summarizing. And so they're still building academic schema through these enrichment classes that are extremely valuable.
Right.
And quite honestly, sometimes the enrichment class brings a little, the kids are able to choose things that they're very interested in. And so then the academic pieces of that almost come more easily. So, we are looking forward to continuing to offer the robust enrichment classes that we have in the past that kids thoroughly enjoy, and they are still learning and growing in those classes.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of thought that was the case, but I guess, and I'm wondering, we've always had much more for elementary. I'm just not sure if there would be any possibilities for middle and high school too, if that's something that's on the radar as well. Or
we run quite a few enrichment classes for our middle school. So I would say the really the K through 8 program is very similar. And then high school, that's where, the 9 through 12 is where you see a shift. And most of those courses are credit recovery. We do offer an ACT prep class. In the past few years, we've offered that. But most have been credit recovery at the high school level.
Eric?
Dan, can you, I forgot who it was, but someone brought up the Wednesdays. I mean, it was Jared was talking about. Can you explain a little bit more about why Wednesdays? I have been getting a couple questions from people in the community of why can't we go back 5 days a week? Why is it 4 days a week? And what is the importance of having that Wednesday? Is it a combination of transportation and food? But what are the logistics that are behind that?
Sure, I'll start, and then all of our team here can probably go in more depth. But it really started with, it wasn't so much even about the logistics, as about the preparation for our teachers. And we know they all started by teaching in the virtual world, but the collaboration that we still have. When we look at our specialists, they're supporting both our in-person teachers and our virtual teachers. And so those team meetings happen on those Wednesdays, and that will continue to be a need, even though there might be a shift about how many people are in the building versus not. Those planning sessions are really important. So that's kind of the big picture, general, that nothing has changed there. But again, I know the principals can, if you want to go more in depth on that, can talk specifically about what's happening.
Well, let me just add a little something for the principals, because here's the question I get is it, if it is the planning, then what is the additional planning in addition to what it normally would be if we were, back to normally in person teaching 5 days a week? Because there's planning that happens during that too. So I'm assuming this is additional planning. If that's the case, can maybe some of the principals just kind of give a real brief background of what that entails and how it's different than it normally would be than a teaching work schedule for a week?
I can start just a little bit, Eric, with the comment that we still will be planning for 2 instructional models, and that's not normal. So we will have in-person and we will still have virtual students. So our teams are still trying to keep students on a very similar pace with very similar learning targets, but they're planning for 2 different modes of delivery. So that takes some extra challenge. Also in our traditional school pre-COVID, principals were able to schedule teams to have some common planning that involved the specialists as well. And in the way that the school day is scheduled now with the 4 lesson blocks, that is not built in to the schedule currently. So the Wednesdays really are a day when all of the specialists and the homeroom teachers, the grade level teachers, can come together unencumbered by the other duties of the day and plan for effective delivery of those instruction in the 2 models. But I'll let the principals share more.
Yeah, I think that covered it pretty well, Lisa, but really it is, planning for a new format, which was our virtual 2.0 format, now moving into the concurrent model. So planning for engaging students who are in front of us face-to-face, as well as using technology to engage the students at home. It's also our opportunity to co-plan with our specialists. So we're thinking about planning for the edges and differentiating our curriculum. And that doesn't take place unless we're meeting together and co-planning as a team with our specialists present. And so that's what happens on Wednesdays. I would just add from the high school's perspective on this piece, once we start on March 15th, I think we have 4 or 5 Wednesdays that are actually with our advisory office hours and in that format that we've been in. A number of the days will be virtual. We'll have instruction that we'll run our schedule virtually and have our instruction. That's every 4-day week that we have. And then we're also doing our testing on those Wednesdays. So we have our Aspire tests on 2 consecutive Wednesdays in April. And we have our forward exam on April 7th, which is a Wednesday. So we have scheduled our testing in on those Wednesdays.
Does that answer your question, Eric? Or
Yeah, it answers it. I thank you very much for the feedback. It helps.
yeah, I think it's hard for some parents who to understand that the concurrent model is really very different than a regular everybody is in the same classroom model. I mean, it does require different attentions, different thinking, different. It's not the same thing, and there just is still a lot going on. It's different. So I appreciate that. Let's see. I thought Elizabeth. Somebody else. Yeah, I think Elizabeth. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to loop us back on the 6-12 conversation. I both agree with Susan and with Eric, which is, I think, let me explain what I mean by that. So we've been getting correspondence, as you're more than well aware, Dan, from families that are like, it can all happen. If we're going to do this thing, then we should be able to do it forever. And I do, and do it for everyone. And, I do think all the public health guidelines are around phased approach, right? So if we do it all at once, so if everyone does it on April 5th, right, then we're not phased anymore. And so we lose that recommendation, we lose that best practice. So that part is comfortable for me, I think. So, from that perspective, I think it makes sense to sort of focus on 4K5 and then focus on 6-12. I think where I'm concerned is like having this happen on the 15th, like March 15th, we're going to come back in our hybrid and those pieces. And then like, when do we think about the possibility, if there even is one, of 6-12 coming back in more full capacity than currently? So I think the sooner we actually can have that conversation, even if the conversation is, what, Elizabeth, it's not going to happen this year because logistically it's too difficult. I think that we need to have that conversation sooner than later. So I really want to push us and really push you, Dan, I think, to concretize that sooner so that we can start having informed decisions around what is that going to look like, because Mitch just referenced like forward testing, for example. So now we got like standardized testing thrown in the mix, and the end of the year will be rapidly approaching. And I think, before we know it, it's going to be sort of May, and then it's, kind of what's the point, but, there's a lot of effort then that goes into a very short amount of time. So I think I'll pause. I'll stop there, I think, because I think I've made my point as clear as I'm capable of making it right now. But I really want to push us to concretize some 6-12, even if it's theoretical, even if it's, based on factors that we can't know right now. I think we need to move there and move there a little faster than we have in our previous planning.
Yeah, I would agree with Elizabeth. Thanks. I would just add real quick that you may even see a drop in community numbers if students are back in school, because it's going to be a safer environment for them. So, it's something to consider for the community as well.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think my initial reaction was I was kind of disappointed that we were even waiting till April 15th to start this. But now I'm looking at the calendar and I'm looking at all the days at the end of the trimester and all the other things that come in. And I think, okay, that makes sense. But I kind of agree that I'd like us to think about which means starting probably before the 6 through 12 kids go back on the 15th, but just to start thinking about, okay, we are going to do that start, but start thinking about, is there any way we could offer that for more people? I'm sure we will still have some students who want to stay virtual, and I don't know how much that number would factor in. But whether there's any way, even though I just said earlier, and I do believe that it's much harder for middle and high school, you can't keep them in the same cohorts. So you have to do something a little different. I'm not sure what that is. Or if it is possible, but I guess I would like us to maybe give more thought to that as well. I have more discussion about it. And the other thing kind of along that same line is just looking ahead to fall, when I'm kind of assuming we will be back, but I'm also assuming that there will be some families who will still want to be virtual in the fall. So we had a little bit of conversation about this in another committee meeting not too long ago, but I just thinking ahead to start, and I guess you probably can't do these surveys till summer. I'm not sure, just because family is, but to try to get a sense of, are there still significant numbers who are going to want to stay virtual in the fall, or if everyone's coming back, is there a way we can accommodate any of that? But just to start looking at that piece as well, because I think that's also going to be something we might have to wrestle with down the road a bit, but I'm certainly hopeful we can all be back in the fall. Susan, go ahead.
I agree. I would really like to see us, I think this is where we struggled before, working to formulate a plan for bringing 6-12 back. So if that date happens, what you've said today is it's more complex. It is going to be more difficult. One thing Lisa seemed to imply was that because we had these cohorts and we already had some structure here, this transition was really going to be a transition piece rather than full upheaval. So I think the more we can put together and know that there is a plan in place for 6-12, I think that would make us feel more comfortable. So I'd support that.
Lorraine?
I also would support that, to have that conversation sooner than later. And then also maybe considering surveying our parents as well for the 6-12.
Yeah, I don't know, I would assume it would mean minimally more PPE, I mean, more plexiglass maybe, or, I mean, I'm thinking of the desks they have at the middle school, they're all 2-person tables. High school small classrooms, some tables, there are lots of differences in small rooms, physically small rooms. So it is very complicated. And I don't know if there are answers, but I guess the other thing is we will be, hopefully at some point we'll have better weather as well, when some kids could be outside some of the time. And that was another question I meant to ask about the extracurriculars or the specials and the elementary related arts. If some of those that are mostly virtual now, if there could be some thought to making some of them, not like using the gym sometimes, or using outside so kids can actually run and be active, maybe go outside to sing, maybe go outside to play instruments. I don't know. I mean, I think as the weather gets better, start continuing to think about all of those aspects as well. What might become available that's not available now. I don't know if any of that would have an impact on 6-12, because they're, it's still much larger numbers of kids. So it's tougher, but.
Or even like, if it's an issue with food or, the food service and stuff, thinking about, being creative about maybe having tents set up in the field, or, things like that, picnic tables to move things outside as it gets warmer. If that's one of the stumbling blocks, I think we'd have a lot of support from people in the community to help out with those types of things. And I know they're doing it in some other districts too. So just things to consider.
Any other questions or concerns? Susan?
I think too, maybe at the next board meeting, just an update on extracurriculars, just a quick update, maybe from Dan, so that we know, so we have a good view and the community can listen to what extracurriculars and sports are going to be doing and kind of how those look.
Sure,
And
be glad to.
anything else? Anybody else have anything they want to comment on if there are no questions? All right, well, then maybe you're right. We are finished earlier than I thought. In that case, I have a motion to move approval of phase 4 of the updated 2020-2021 reopening plan as presented.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, Eric, is there a second?
Second.
And okay, Lorraine. It's been moved and seconded. Roll call vote. Eric,
Aye.
Lorraine,
Aye.
Elizabeth,
Aye.
Susan,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
and I'm aye. So the motion has carried. Given that, I think we have no further business, so I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'd move we adjourn.
Okay, second,
Second.
and that was Elizabeth. I'm sorry. I didn't, okay. Then moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Well, I guess I'll call on you. Peter,
Aye.
Susan,
Aye.
Lorraine,
Aye.
Elizabeth,
Aye.
Eric. That was an aye.
Aye. Aye.
That's okay. I got it. Aye. The motion has carried and therefore we are adjourned at 7:07. All right. Thank you.